So in the last video, we set up our front-end React app and connected it to our FastAPI backend. And we went ahead and retrieved the data that comes from the root endpoint. So if I just quickly show you the network, refresh it, and just zoom in a little bit because I think it's a bit small. Yeah, so we went ahead and fetched the data from our root endpoint. And this just comes back with awesome leads manager, and we just display it here. We also went ahead and installed like our dependencies like Bulma, yeah, I think Moment and stuff like that. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and look at user registration. So we have that already in the backend from an earlier video in the series, but we want to go ahead and send a registration request to the backend so we can create a user. Now, one thing to note is, I don't know if you guys came across it, but in this create endpoint, so create user, this doesn't actually work properly if you have the code that looks exactly like this. And the reason for that is I forgot to add user here. So we just need to put user equals await services create user. And that's because this before that, this user here, we were using the one that we passed in, and that's obviously incorrect. We want the user that's been created, and so we can then just generate the token from that. That's really the backend, more or less done. I have everything up and running, so the FastAPI, oops, let me just get rid of this. I have the FastAPI backend up and running along with the front end. So this is the front end on port 3000 and FastAPI on port 8000. And that's all connected up through the package .json via the proxy. So yeah, in this video, we're going to go ahead and start dealing with registration. So to begin with, the first thing I want to do is create a context. So our user context. And if you're not familiar with like the context hook that comes with React, then definitely recommend checking out some videos on that. There's some great ones on YouTube. And I don't want to jump too much into the technical details of the context hook. But in this video, we'll be using that rather than something like Redux. And that's so we can access our token and our set token function like throughout the entire app. So I've gone ahead and created a folder inside source and named it context. And within that, just create a new file and call it user context.jsx, just like that. So to get started with the user context, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and actually import all the necessary stuff. So first of all, React from React. And we also want to actually, let's just go ahead and create the component. So it's kind of like the same way as we'd create any other component with just a few other minor details. So first, export const and then user context. And this will set to the create context that comes with React. And this VS Code automatically imports it for me. So you should see something like that here on line 1 with the import. Next, we'll create our user provider. So export const and then user provider. And this will have props. Take in some props. And we'll have our token. So we'll say the token and set token comes from the use state, which again is automatically imported on line 1. And then just local storage dot get item, and we'll call this awesome leads token, or just give it something unique, something that like you know for sure that no other name will have it. And yeah, so we can now do we can use use effect, which again is automatically imported. And then curly brackets. So we need a function that will fetch the user, and the API endpoint that we want is this /API/users/me. And what this will do is it will use the token that you currently have within local storage, send a request to this /me endpoint. If it comes back okay, if it's a successful response, then of course the user token is still valid. If it comes back with like an error, so if it's not okay response, then we will set the local storage to null, which will automatically log the user out. So to do that, let's first create a function, and this will say fetch user. And this will be asynchronous, just like our endpoint. And this will, first let's create our request options. So request options, and this will be an object with the method get headers, and within headers we'll have the content type as application /JSON, and the authorization with a capital A, authorization, and this will be bearer, and then space, so the white space after that, and then just concatenate token. So that's our request options. Then we can go ahead and actually make the request. So the response is await, and then fetch, and we'll say /API /users/me, and within that request options. Then we'll do a check. So if the response is not okay, so if !response.okay, so if the response is not okay, then we will set the token to null. And then finally, we'll just update local storage, set item. And this is again the same here. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it in, and we'll say token. So yeah, that's our fetch user. Next, we can actually make the call to fetch user. We can say just fetch user. And then at the end of our use effect, so what we want is a dependency, and we'll say token. So every time tokens are updated, then just do this. And that hopefully should be fine. The next thing we want to do is actually just return this provider. So we can say user context dot provider, and then within that we'll say props dot children. And we also want to make this token and set token like accessible. So in order to do that, all you have to do is within this pass it in as a prop value equals an object array, and it will be token and set token. And that's really it. We'll check it out in a bit once we have our registration up and running. Hopefully no errors. But yeah, now what we need to do is jump into index.js. And first of all, we actually need to import our Bulma. So the Bulma library that we installed in the last video, in order to like make use of like the styling that comes with it. So Bulma /CSS /Bulma.min.css. And now actually, if you go back to the app and just refresh it, you'll see that Awesome Leads Manager is now like smaller size, different font, and also kind of like a light gray. And that's because that's the default for Bulma. And next, we just need to import our user provider. So we need to have this available within like the app itself. So we can say user provider, and then we'll just do from.context /user context. And now just in front of the app, we can say user provider, and then the closing tag we'll put at the end of app. So it should look something like this. I don't know why this extra space is there now. Let me find as is. But yeah, that's what we have. We can actually check the application memory. So if we go here, we refresh, we now have awesome leads token null, because what it's doing is it's getting, so when you get the item from the, so when we say use state local storage get item awesome leads token, it's finding whatever there is in there. If it doesn't exist, it will set it to null, and then it will make the request. And obviously the response was not okay, and then we set the token to null, and there you have it. But yeah, that's our user context and our index.js sorted. Now we can go ahead and actually dive into the more like visual side of it. And yeah, this is also actually the more like the hardest part probably of this series, which is this whole context. If you're unfamiliar with it, otherwise definitely recommend checking out some of the content that's out there. But inside our source folder, I've created another directory called components. Within components, let's create one called register.jsx. Now, this is where like we'll create our form along with like all the kind of like stuff to handle submission and all that. So we'll say import React from React. And we also want our user context. So import user in curly brackets, user context, and then from context / user context. And the name of our component, we'll just call it register. And we need 4 things. So we need the email. We need the email variable. We need a password one, a confirmation password, and also an error message. So let's say you register a user that already exists. We want to display some kind of message to the user. So we'll say const, and then email, and set email. And this will be use state, which is automatically imported for me. And let's duplicate this about 4 times. So now this one, instead of email, will be password. This will be set password. This will be confirmation password. So let's do set confirmation password. And then this here will be an error message. Error message and set error message. And yeah, so they're the 4 variables that we kind of need. Next, we also need the set token. So when registering, we'll automatically log the user in. We don't need the token, but we just need the set token function. So if you remember here in the context, we have token and set token. The token we don't care about, the set token we do. So if it's successful, set the token to whatever we get. And in order to just get that, so we can say const and then just an array, then comma, and set token. And what that does, it will just unpack this array, and it will ignore everything before the last element. So like token, and just take out set token. You can say here, use context, which is automatically imported. And if you want to see the imports, it's up there on line 1. And then we just say user context, just like that. So they're the kind of 5 variables, if you like, that we need. We can now go ahead and start setting up our actual return JSX. So let's just return. Now, what we need to do is first add some styling in. So we need, this will be a column. Actually, let me just use a shortcut. So if you do div and then column, if you're using VS Code, this should automatically set the class name, and then form. And this will have a class name of box. We can get rid of the action. And then let's create a title for it. So h1, and this will be a title of just title, and then has text centered. and this will just center the title within the kind of form. And we can just say register. Next, let's create a field. So we'll say div, and then the class name is field. And within that field, we want a label, and that will have a class name of just label. Oops. HTML4, we can get rid of that. We don't need that. Although it's probably good practice to keep that in. And then here we'll say email address. And then we can add our input. So we say div and then control. And within that control, we'll add our input. And this will have a type of email. It will then have a placeholder of, let's say, enter email. And then we'll have our value, which is the value of our email. So as it's set to an empty string, the value right now will be an empty string. However, when we change the value inside the input field, so on change, we want to also update the email variable. So we can say e, so for event, and then just say set email to e.target.value. And that when I just clicked Command S, like it just formats it for me, but that's what you should have so far. We'll set the class name to input. And then we'll just say this is required. And yeah, so that's our email. We can copy this a couple times as we only, yeah, there's no point like repeating ourselves over and over again. So we need one for password. We'll say password. The type here will be password. Enter password. Value will be password. And this here will be set password. And let's copy this as our confirmation password. Will be very similar. We can say confirm password. Type will be password, enter password. And the value here will be confirmation password. And here we'll say set confirmation password. So yeah, that's our kind of bulk of our form. All we need now is to just add like a button that will, submit it. So underneath, just before the closing form, we'll add a button. And this have a class name of button and is primary. And the type for this will be a submit. And we can say register. And let's just add like a break here, just to give it some nice space. But yeah, let's go ahead and actually look at it. So if we go to app.jsx, let's import register. So import register. Sorry, go back to register. We just actually have to export it. So export default and then register. And then back in app.jsx, we can say register, import it, and then let's say just below the message, we can just put in register, like so. So if we go back, you should see something like this. It doesn't do anything right now. But yeah, that's what we have. Cool. So let's go back into register. We need to add some other functions. So we need to actually submit something when we click on the button. And the first kind of helper function I want to create is one called like submit registration. So it will just submit the data that we put in our form. And we'll say submit registration. And this will be asynchronous. This will be making an asynchronous call to the backend. And this will have request options. And the method will be a post. the headers, we need the content type. We're not going to be sending a token or anything because when registering, of course, there will be no token. And then body, JSON dot stringify, and we can throw in email, it will be email, and the hash password. And I'll show you, and this also has to be camel case, as that's what it's like in our backend. So password. And the reason why we're doing email and hash password, if you remember in our create user, we have, if you look at the body of it, we have email and hash password. So we need it like that. Yeah, so that's our body. Let's go ahead and actually make the response or request. So const response equals await, and then fetch /API/users. And then the request options can throw in the data will be await response.json. And then we can go ahead and check to see if everything worked out well. So if the response was not okay, then what we can do is set the error message to data.detail. And I know all this in advance. That's the error message that we get. So data.detail. And then else we can just set the token. So just automatically log the user in to data.access_token. And remember, our user context will check to see when a token is updated, make a call. If everything works out, then you're in. Otherwise, yeah, you haven't been authenticated properly. So that's our submit registration. Next, we'll create a function that will handle our submit. So just handle submit basically. And we can say const handle submit. And then say the event. So that takes a parameter, which is the event. And we'll say e.prevent default. And that just stops the form from doing its like default thing. So in HTML, I think when actually submitting a form, it does some stuff. With our case, we want it to not do all that. So we'll just prevent all the default stuff from happening. And we'll add some checks. So we'll say if the password is equal to the confirmation password and the password.length is, let's say, greater than 5, which I do not recommend if you were to actually deploy this. Set it to something like 8, but for testing reasons, like this, for testing purposes, this is fine. We'll say submit registration. Otherwise, we will set an error message. So set error message to ensure that the passwords match and greater than 5 characters. So yeah, that's our handle submit. So if everything has been validated, the passwords match and the password length is greater than 5, then you're okay to submit the registration. Otherwise, you get an error message, and we'll go ahead and display that in a second. So that's really it. What we can do now is create another component, which will just be our error message. And this is a very kind of like simple one. We don't need much to it. We will say, so in components, new file, and we'll say error message.jsx. And here we'll just import React from React. We'll say const and then error message. You can say message. And this will, not curly brackets, just normal brackets, as yeah, we can just return it as is. We won't be doing anything fancy here. So it will be paragraph, and we'll say the class name is has text weight can't spell, wait, and then bold. And we also want has text danger. So it gives it this kind of red color. And then we'll just say message. And that's really it. We can just export default error message. And this will come in handy for like all our other things. So like when submitting an actual lead or logging in, we can make use of this. And then down here on our form, first of all, we need to add on submit. So when we submit, just call handle submit. And lastly, in the at the bottom, just before our button and above the break, we can say error message, which has been automatically imported. So this here, so import error message from error message. And then all we have to do is just say the message is message. Is error message, sorry, not message. Just like that. And yeah, let's go ahead and check it out. So hopefully everything's working fine. Let's add an email address. Let's say test@test.com. I know I created a user like that. I reset the database just before starting this video. So hopefully it should be fine. And then let's add a password. First of all, let's make sure that the passwords don't match up. Register, ensure that the passwords match and greater than 5 characters. It's not the greatest error message, but yeah. And we can actually, let's open up the network tab. Let's do the password again. Let's give it an actual password. Register. So it's made a request to users, you can see here, and get users.me. And hopefully now in the application, we have our token. So we have awesome leads token and then this here. Cool, yeah. So what we need to do now is let's just do a bit of styling and just sort of clean it up a little bit. So that's our registrations taken care of along with our error message. Let's first create our header. So kind of like just display this awesome leads manager in a more kind of readable and yeah, let people know that it's actually the name of this app. So in components, let's create a new file. We'll say header JSX. And within header, this will make use of token as well. So we can do import React from React. And we also need the user context. So user context from context, user context, and the header will take in a title. So the title we pass in here. So we'll be passing in this awesome leads manager. And what this will do is first we need the token. So we can say token and set token. And this is also where our logout will come in handy. And we'll say use context and then user context, not user provider, user context. And we'll create a function that handles logout. So handle logout. And what this will do is just set the token to null. And we will return first a div with a class name as has text centered. You can see that I like to center everything. I don't know how good that is design wise, but yeah. So we want this div, so with the class name has text centered and a margin of 6. And we'll add our h1, which will have the class name title. And we will throw in the title here. And then finally, we'll add our logout button. And we only want to show our logout button when a user's actually logged in. We don't want to show it when they haven't been authenticated or on the home page before they register or log in. So what we can do is just say if the token exists, so if it's not null, And remember, like if it's null, then this is false. And then put 2 ampersands and say button, and we'll just add logout. So, and then finally we'll say the class name is button, and on click will be handle logout. And then lastly, we can just export default header. So back in the app.jsx, let's go ahead and import header. So we can say import header from components / header. And here within our kind of return statement, let me just add a few spaces below that. So what we want to do is we can first actually just go ahead and clear everything out here and just rewrite this a bit. So we'll create a empty tag. Within that, let's first throw in the header. And the title will be the message. So if we head back now, we see this, where we get the logout button because our token exists here. And then underneath that, let's create a div with the class name columns, so columns plural. And then let's just create some empty columns just for styling. That's one. We make 3 of them. The middle one, we want this one to have a margin of 5, and we can say is 2/3. It's like that. And now here we can say if the token exists or not. So we need to import token from the user context. So let's do const and then token and set token, and that will use context, which is automatically imported on line 1, and we need the user context, and that too is automatically imported on line 5. We don't need set token, so we can just get rid of that. But yeah, that's really all we need. We don't need a comma here, just the first element. So unpack the first one. But yeah, now back down in our like return statement, we can say if the token exists or if it does not exist. So if no token, then we want to return the register. So we can first add, let's add another div with the class name columns. Within that, we'll say register, and we'll add a placeholder for login for now, and we'll revisit that in the next video. So that's our, yeah, if the token does not exist. And then if it does, so colon after the curly bracket, after the normal bracket, sorry. And we can just say here, return, put a placeholder for table. So if we go back, and now we see just a table as we are logged in. If we hit log out, and keep an eye out here on the local storage that I've got open here with key value, the value should now be set to null. So now it's null. We don't log in, fresh, and all that. So if we create another user, let's do test1@gmail.com. Register. And now we have our token, it checks for it, our table placeholder is now there. And yeah, that should really be it for this video. So we've managed to go ahead and create our register form, submit a registration, and actually create a user. And we've also just added a bit more styling along with our placeholders. In the next video, we'll look at login and actually writing that up. And then after that, we'll be focusing mainly on the kind of the whole create leads and deleting, updating, and reading them, all that stuff. But yeah, I will push all this up to my GitHub. And yeah, if you want to check that out, the description is in the link of this video. the link is in the description of this video. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video. And yeah, if you aren't familiar with the context hook that comes with React, then please go ahead and check that out. It's very useful for stuff like authentication, as you've seen. But yeah, there's more validation we could have added, like validation for the email, all that. But this is, I want to keep this series as minimal as possible. So yeah, and you can also realize we're not making use of the router or React routers here or any form of routing, as you know, it's, again, like I said, very minimal. If you are logged in, you get the table. If you're not, register login, all that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it brought you some value. If you want to, get in contact with me, there is a Discord server. The link is also in the description, so feel free to join that. But yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next video.